This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated almost without knowing it when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THEATHLETIC. Make your first deposit of at least $10, place your first bet on any game, and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
This season, a new hot deal has arrived at Metro. $25 a line for 4 lines with all the data you need and 4 free Samsung Galaxy A15 5G phones. Getting Metro's best deals is easy. No ID required, no activation fees. Get a new number or keep your own. It's up to you. That's 4 lines for $25 a line, plus 4 free phones. Visit a store or go online today. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
When you join Metro Plus Tax. For a limited time and subject to change. Max 1 offer per account.
The Athletic.
What's the toughest job in F1? The driving? Forget about it. That's the easy part. The hardest job in F1 is, without doubt, running a team. And I should know. I'm Otmar Szafnauer, and I've served as team principal for both the Aston Martin and Alpine F1 teams. From signing drivers to getting stuck into F1 politics, I've done it all. And on this show, I'll lift the lid on just what it takes to do the job. I'll also give my unique perspective on what's going on in F1 right now and share some behind-the-scenes stories from my career. Welcome to the Team Principal Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Team Principal Podcast, the show that lifts the lid on the life of an F1 team principal. I'm Otmar Szafnauer, and I'm joined once again by my deputy, Ben Anderson. Ben, how's it going?
Very good, thanks, Otmar. Nice to see you. I'm very much looking forward to this episode because I love the topic.
Yep, we're going to be talking F1 politics on this episode. Are you ready to get political?
I am, yeah. I'm sharpening my knives, my political knives. Better watch your back. I'll be after your job if you're not careful. But first, before I come after you, I think it would be fitting for us to open this episode by giving you the floor to pay tribute to a fellow team principal, Eddie Jordan, who we sadly lost recently.
Yeah, very, very, very sad. Eddie, a true racer. His checkered flag came way too soon. he was very fit, looked after himself, and it's it's sad that he's not with us anymore. And I really had a lot of respect for what Eddie achieved. I enjoyed his company as a person. He was a great human being and a true racer. He started his racing career behind the wheel in, single seaters. And I have great respect for people who start off that way, but then go on to achieve even greater things as a team owner, a team principal, a mentor to many, many F1 personnel. And very, very sad that I'm not going to see him in Monaco for a beer and a burger, or at Silverstone. He was always in the BRDC, and he was just so much fun to be around, and a bit of a joker sometimes, but behind that facade was a steely competitor. And you underestimated Eddie when he was competing against you at your peril. He was such a competitor, and I have the utmost respect for him, and he will greatly be missed.
Yeah, well said. You don't win races in F1 without that steel, obviously. And what was your relationship with Eddie like? Because obviously he founded the team that eventually you ended up running at one point in your career, but you must have been competitors at different points and friends at other points. So
yeah, absolutely all that. Competitors when I was at British American Racing, of course, we wanted to beat Eddie. We had the Works Honda engine. He had a Mugen Honda engine, and we're true competitors. And then when Honda and Eddie parted, I was there with Tanaka-san and Eddie negotiating his exit, and that's when I saw how good of a negotiator he was. And and then later on we became friends. And yes, I ended up running what was the Jordan team when it became Force India. And I said this to Eddie recently. I created a racing culture there. We had fire in our belly to prove to the world that even with little resource, we could overcome that and compete with the bigger teams. And that's exactly what Eddie did. He didn't have the resource of the bigger teams. He ended up winning races, always competitive, finishing high in the championship. And I said to Eddie, it was easy for me to create that culture at Force India because it was always there. The culture that Eddie created never left. It was just, and all I had to do was uncover it. It was just dampened down by the people that had it before. And just lifting the lid on what he created, was the genius of Force India. And we had that culture of no politics, and that culture of that racing culture that you do anything for on-track performance. On-track performance is paramount in all of your decision-making. And everybody was like that there. And that started with Eddie Jordan.
Interesting you mention politics there and trying to have no politics. Great way to run a team, it sounds like, the way he did things. He'll be sorely missed, Eddie, a true titan of the F1 paddock. Of course, after he lost Michael Schumacher to Benetton in 1991, Ron Dennis, who was running McLaren at the time, famously quipped to him, "Welcome to the Piranha Club." And I think that's quite a neat segue into our main topic this episode, F1 politics, because the Piranha Club term has very much stuck, has come to symbolise the sometimes kind of cutthroat nature of the paddock and Formula One in general. And one man who found that out the hard way this week is Liam Lawson, who obviously had a very difficult start to the season, 2 very tough races, having got the dream promotion to Red Bull Racing, demoted to Racing Bulls, with Yuki Tsunoda swapping and taking his place alongside Max Verstappen at Red Bull for the Japanese Grand Prix. So my first question to you, were you as amazed by everyone else at this thing happening so soon into the season?
No, not really. Look, people will look at it and say Liam was demoted.
Yeah.
But if you're a talented driver and you just haven't had the break to make it into Formula One, and there's a few of them, they would welcome a demotion to another Formula One team. So although it looks like it's a demotion going from Red Bull to Racing Bulls, it's still a Formula One drive. Liam can still, at Racing Bulls, hone his skills. He can still get used to what it's like driving in Formula One. He can still perform well at Racing Bulls. And then in the future, you never know, maybe get promoted back up. So although it looks bleak, it's not for Liam. The question for me is, he definitely has potential. Was he given enough time at Red Bull to realize that potential? Where on the learning curve was he? Should he have been giving more than 2 races? It looks like from the outside that it was purely a sporting decision. And I'm sure Christian, Helmut, and the decision makers are now thinking, what driver pairing is best for us to maximize our ability to win or finish as high as we can in the Constructors' Championship? And that's probably what drove their decision.
It's a strange one still, though, isn't it? Because they had the opportunity to weigh this all up in the winter. It's 2 drivers they know well who are racing against each other in the junior team. And after what you imagine was a quite serious deliberation and poring over the data and whatnot and weighing up all the various factors, they picked Liam. They said, you're our guy. You're the one we think can support Max as best as possible. And then after only 2 races, they switch. Like, that seems like the left hand doesn't know what the right is doing. So how do you feel about the way Christian Horner, as a fellow team principal, has handled that situation? Because you could say, well, it's taking swift action and, not resting on underperformance. But then also you could say, well, it's a bad decision to have given Lawson the drive in the first place if he's no good after 2 races.
Well, the one thing that you said there is, we think this is the right decision. So what you're trying to do is forecast the future. And
tricky.
With all the information that you have, you're trying to forecast the future. And then when you're in that future, when that future becomes a present and you can look back and say, maybe we didn't make the right decision, it's better to stand up, raise your hand and say, look, we tried. Maybe this wasn't the best decision for us, and therefore we're going to change it. And that's better than sticking with your wrong decision for a long time and then realizing it wasn't the right decision and changing. The question for me is, now that you've changed, is this the right decision, or should you have stuck with it? And again, you're trying to predict the future. So I think Yuki will go well in Japan. Probably couldn't have been a better racetrack for him to start with at Racing Bulls. He knows it well. And it's a track where if you have great experience there, you can eke out even more lap time than somebody who doesn't. The fact that you've driven it a lot gives you more lap time than, say, some other circuits. So I think he will go well, but, it's only a few days away, and we'll know. Just over a week, and we'll have a good idea of how quick Yuki's going to be there. So I hate to predict the future when it's only a week away, but let's see what happens. And I totally understand the decision.
Yeah, difficult scenario to manage too, because you could make the same argument with Liam. It's the first track that he knows well and has raced in F1 before. So Red Bull could face this quite challenging scenario where Yuki does better in the Red Bull than Lawson has in the first 2 races, relatively speaking, compared to Max. But also because of how good the Racing Bulls car has been generally, Liam might still outpace Tsunoda in the second team. So you could end up in a situation where whichever driver you put in, it doesn't matter.
Be. Didn't that happen with Gasly when, like you say, he went back to Toro Rosso at the time, and suddenly
he was right there, wasn't he?
Exactly. Gasly was, if I remember right, doing better in the Toro Rosso than he did in the Red Bull. If that's the case, then you've got to ask yourself, drivability of the Red Bull versus the Racing Bulls. I read a lot now of, well, this car has been the development direction has been completely set by how Max likes the car dynamics, the vehicle dynamics of that racing car.
He doesn't like the car at the moment, even though that tends to be the case.
However, you can, it's not a controlled experiment. You could like it even less if somebody else had the development direction.
Yeah, sure.
So, there's all that as well. And but I think making this decision, if Liam was going to stay where he showed in the first 2 races, you definitely make that decision now. What you're trying to do is guess how steep his learning curve was and how quickly he could get up that learning curve at Red Bull. And that's a hard thing to guess. But let's see what happens.
Red Bull's had a bit of a problem with this second seat going back more than just this year. They've got Max Verstappen, this unicorn driver that they've discovered, and he's, fantastic, probably one of the best to ever do it. And they just cannot find the perfect fit alongside. Do you think it's fair to criticise Red Bull management for not being able to find the right second driver? Because they've had this problem basically since Daniel Ricciardo left the team.
Yeah, no, they're trying, and they're in a privileged and enviable position to have 4 seats four seats in Formula One to move around.
That's how they got Max in the first place.
Yeah, that's right, and some others, Sebastian Vettel. He came through Toro Rosso, and they did that on purpose. And you just, because you have that privilege where others don't, and some of the others have to take their junior drivers and loan them out to a Williams or somebody else and see how they go, or to, a Sauber in the past. I think Leclerc was there, and George Russell was at Williams and ended up at Mercedes. And the trouble with doing that is you don't have perfect information. The other team does. When you own both teams, you have perfect information about the drivers, and you can make a better decision. And I always say, you need good information to make a good decision. So, yes, they're in a privileged position, and that's why they can swap and chop and change. But in this one, let's see what happens.
Do you think there's any politics at play behind this whole scenario? Because it's been no secret that since Dietrich Mateschitz died, there's been a kind of power struggle behind the scenes at Red Bull. There's been different factions. Christian Horner's become a kind of ostracizing figure in himself. There's Helmut Marco. He seems at odds with Christian. It's a unique position to have someone like Helmut Marco kind of semi-running the team with you, or at least responsible for certain aspects of it. How do you think that whole dynamic has played a role here? Because there's also been stories that Tsunoda was kind of Marco's pick and Lawson was Horner's pick. So you could look at it as like, well, Horner's had his go, and then elements of Red Bull have gone, this isn't working out. So now we give Helmut his head, if you like.
Ultimately, if Tsunoda gets in the car and does really, really well over time, I don't think it matters who put him there. I just think what matters is where you finish in the championship and how well you do in the drivers.
Yeah, true. I mean, we should say also there's a Honda element at play, because Honda backs Yuki. He's like a protege of theirs, and some money's changed hands, it seems, as well. Our information is that Honda have stumped up some cash to kind of get things over the line. So I mean, that's something that's always at play, right? There's politics is one thing, but money talks in F1.
I worked for Honda for 8 years, and they always were helping Japanese drivers. They helped Takuma Sato in the past, who finished on the podium with BAR Honda. But ultimately, it's not about nationality. Ultimately, it's about the talent that you have.
We were talking before about factions within teams, in this case, Red Bull. Did you ever have a situation in your career where you had different political factions within the team fighting for control or pushing different agendas? I imagine at Alpine, it was more difficult for you because you had the Renault corporate structure around. That must have been quite challenging.
Yeah, so I've had, in my day, as you can imagine, 27 years of this, I've had owners trying to push drivers that they wanted, where I had to resist.
Have you got an example?
Yeah. I had, I remember VJ, ultimately VJ decided to go with Sergio, but I remember Bob Fernley's favorite at the time was Pastor Maldonado over Sergio. And
so this would have been for 2014 when Sergio Perez was on the market, leaving McLaren. Yeah,
and I was really pushing for Sergio. I thought he was the better driver, and at the time, Pastor had won a race.
Yes,
he came with we talked about financing before. He came with significantly more financing than Sergio did.
Wow. And Perez wasn't short of a few.
No, Perez
bob.
had good. He had good support from Telmex, but Pastor's PDVSA was significantly more money. And like I said, and he was a good driver and a race winner. Sergio hadn't won a race yet, and I kept pushing, and some of the others did too. VJ to go with Sergio, and that was ultimately the decision that we came to, and I think it was the right one. It's never a controlled experiment. You don't know how well Pastor would have done in that car, but we can look back and say, Sergio won a race for Racing Point and did very well, but yeah, Sergio I had to fight for. When at Alpine we had an open seat after Piastri was usurped by McLaren, and Fernando decided to go with Aston. I had all sorts of pressure as to who to take. And I remember thinking, it's odd for Toro Rosso or Racing Bulls or whatever they were called something else at the time. I can't remember.
AlphaTauri, I think it probably was, yeah.
I thought it was odd for AlphaTauri to announce years early that Pierre Gasly, that they're going to stop with Pierre Gasly. They're not going to renew his contract. And that was really odd to announce that over a year before it happens. And I remember going to the bosses at Alpine and saying, there's an opportunity here. If we go after Pierre, we can give him a longer life in Formula One than AlphaTauri are offering. And out of the kindness of their hearts, because they moved him up, moved him down, and now they're announcing to the world they're going to stop with him. Perhaps if we offer him a longer term contract than he has at AlphaTauri, they may let him go. And I negotiated with Helmut. Helmut told me, look, you've got to find somebody that's equally good, and then I will consider letting him go. And my first port of call then was Colton Herta. We couldn't get the
super license.
License for Colton. And then we also thought either to hire him ourselves or swap with Pierre was Nick de Vries. And when he stepped in the Williams and did a really good job, I think in Monza.
That's right, yeah. Albon had appendicitis, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. The old appendicitis, that gets them all.
Yeah.
And then, isn't that why Bierman stepped in?
Yes, it was. Yeah, Carlos Sainz had it at Saudi Arabian Grand Prix.
Yeah, exactly. So it must be something with the
seating position, maybe.
G-forces that you see in a Formula One car. It gets your appendix. Yeah. But yeah, so when Nick de Vries did really well, Helmut was happy to give him a try, and we swapped him for Pierre. But you can imagine I had all sorts of pressure as to who to take, and I was really keen to have somebody with lots of Formula One experience that was proven and can be quick, and Pierre proved to be all those things.
Who did Renault want?
Yeah, you can imagine. Giovinazzi was one, for example.
Okay, yeah.
Who else was on the list? Giovinazzi was the one that I remember.
Okay.
That was wanted by the Alpines.
He'd been floating around kind of after the Alfa Romeo time as a Ferrari reserve, etc.
Yeah,
okay.
He was there. He was in the picture at the time.
What was it like to negotiate with Helmut Marco?
I like Helmut because he's a straight shooter.
Yeah.
So, what you see is what you get with him. And
usually is with the Austrians, I think.
He was really clear as to what had to happen, and he stuck to it. Once he said, look, for you to be able to release Pierre a year early, this is what I want. And once he was happy that what he wanted we could give, no problem. He didn't go back on his word. He didn't try to change it, nothing. So I really enjoyed and it was quite short, my discussions. 2 weeks, the deal was done.
Wow. His partner in crime, if you like, Christian Horner, you must know him a bit. Do you think he's a shrewd political operator in F1? What do you make of him in terms of how he plays the game?
Look, I've been to many, many F1 commission meetings with Christian, and he does a really good job at fighting his corner. we all in those meetings want to sway the decision makers or the rules or the regulations to our benefit. And, and so does Christian. You can't blame him for that. Everybody wants to win. The value of winning is high. And if part of, there's a lot of aspects that go into winning. And one of it is to influence the regulations or the rules in such a way that the infrastructure, the team, the capabilities that you have will favor those rules. That's what you do. I can remember when COVID came and Pirelli actually said, we're not going to have an opportunity to develop a new tire. So therefore, the downforce has to be reduced.
They cut the cheese wedge out of the floor, didn't they?
Cut the cheese wedge out of the floor. Well, how did that happen? That had a greater impact on the cars that were running a low rake. And there are only 2 cars running a low rake at that point. And
Mercedes was one. Yeah, Racing Point was the other.
So, how did that come about? That came about influencing the FIA, influencing Formula One to make that change. Because that change was done on safety grounds. So
because the tyres were becoming oversaturated. That was the argument, wasn't it? That the downforce level was so high, the tyres can't take it, and we can't do a new tyre for these cars. So therefore, we need to cut the downforce.
So the downforce was cut. The teams all voted to cut the downforce by reducing the size of the rear wing. The argument was made that Williams wasn't going to be able to afford new rear wings. I don't know how they afforded new floors, because floors are more expensive than rear wings. But therein lies the politics of Formula One, and those aren't intra-team politics; those are inter-team politics. And there's a lot of that going on. And to be successful in Formula One, you have to minimize or have the intra-team politics be non-existent. The inter-team politics, you have to just be on top of them. That is hard to minimize because you can't control what the others are doing. But within the team, you've got to make sure no politics. Because if you do have politics and people care more about their own career than they do lap time, then they'll be focused on their own career and not lap time. And once that happens and you multiply it by 1,000, just a little bit of misguided focus means you're suboptimal, and those who don't suffer from it will beat you.
We'll get back to the podcast in a moment, but first, let me tell you about Grammarly. Your time and expertise are valuable, and with professionals spending nearly half the work week on written communication, focus is one of the most important things to have at work. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and get through your work faster with relevant, real-time suggestions wherever you write. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster with AI prompts, tone suggestions, and more. And what's more, you can enjoy it with peace of mind with Grammarly's enterprise-grade security and its business model that doesn't sell your data. Experience the gold standard of responsible AI with Grammarly, a tool that 93% of professionals report helps them get more work done. So what are you waiting for? Get more done with Grammarly. Download Grammarly free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast.
How can you grow your business from idea to industry leader? Bring your vision to life with smart business buying tools and technology from Amazon Business. From fast, free shipping to in-depth buying insights and automated purchase approvals, we deliver everything you need to achieve your goals. It's not easy to stand out from the crowd. Simplify how you stock up to get ahead. Go to amazonbusiness.com for support.
This episode is brought to you by 20th Century Studios' The Amateur. When his wife is murdered, Charlie Heller, the CIA's most brilliant computer analyst, must trek across the globe and use his only weapon, his intelligence, to hunt down her killers and enact revenge. Starring Academy Award winner Rami Malek and Academy Award nominee Lawrence Fishburne. The Amateur. Rated PG-13. Only in theaters April 11th.
Do you think you can succeed as a team principal in F1 without being a good political operator?
Well, maybe the answer to that is if you are a good political operator, you've got greater chance of success. And I say that from two different angles. One, within the team, you've got to make sure that you have zero politics. Focus on car performance, on-track performance, lap time, and don't worry about politics.
How do you stop it, though? Because you've got so many employees of differing seniority, and there's always going to be people who are ambitious or they want to climb over somebody else, or they want to go in a different direction. How's the boss, the buck stopper, how do you achieve this non-political environment? Because it's talked about a lot in Formula One.
It is.
We're an apolitical team, and they always say with a smaller racing team, it's easier.
It is
purely because of numbers. You've got fewer people. So
it is easier, and it's easier to instill that psychological safety at work. And, high-performing teams talk about psychological safety, meaning we all look after each other. We're not stabbing each other in the back, and we're all focused on what the goal is. And, if you're a basketball team and there's 5 of you on the court, 15 on the team, it's easier. Or if you're a sculling team and you're in a boat of 8 or 4, it's easier. If you're a Formula One team and there's 1,000 of you, it's a little bit harder. But that's not to say it can't be done. And I remember at Force India, one thing I always preached to everybody was we have to make this the best place in Formula One to work. Not really psychological safety, but a big part of making it the best place to work is having psychological safety. Everyone's pulling in the same direction.
How did you try or work to create this same kind of culture at a bigger manufacturer-backed team like Alpine with the whole Renault corporate element to it? Because with Racing Point, Force India, as it was before, Jordan,
was easier.
Much easier because of the, as we talked at the top of the show, Eddie Jordan's foundation of that team.
Jordan had that already.
Exactly.
Right? I just had to lift the lid on it and add to it, right?
Yeah.
Hire like-minded people.
Yeah.
So that definitely was easier. And Vijay Mallya let me do it.
Yeah, he was hands-off, wasn't he?
He was really, really hands-off.
Yeah.
At Alpine, I started down that road. I was only given a year and a half to do it. We were getting there. But it takes more than a year and a half. Now, you got to remember, Alpine had a bit of that already in
the Team
the
Enstone
Renault,
culture.
Team Enstone, Benetton. They had that underdog type, punch above your weight. They had that. So a bit of it was uncovering it. But when you get interference from a greater corporate entity, it makes it much, much more difficult, nearly impossible. When, for example, a huge influence on culture is your HR department. And when they don't report to you and you have no control over them, and the HR department is the corporate entity dictates to your local HR department on what they need to do, on the processes they need to follow, then it becomes really difficult. You got to be a racing team. And I've said this many, many times, and I'll say it on this podcast. Big corporate entities need to act like navies. Formula One teams have to be pirates. Otherwise, you're not going to win. A navy is not going to win against pirates in Formula One.
So were you effectively the victim of politics in your time in that team then, in the sense that you had one organisation doing its own thing, separate from you, not really empowering you to do your job, not really giving you the control you needed to create exactly the culture you wanted?
Definitely the victim of intra-team politics.
Must have been tough to take.
Look, it definitely wasn't optimal for me, but it was certainly suboptimal for the team. I think ultimately the team is I believe, much worse off when those types of decisions are made.
And how hard did you fight against it? Did you realise quite quickly that it was a losing battle, or did you think, actually, I can convince this, this bigger entity to get on board with my way of thinking?
Yeah, I thought that what was promised to me was actually going to happen. Personally, I stick to my word, and because I have that ethos, that philosophy, that's how I go about my daily life or my life in general. I expected others to do the same, and that wasn't the case.
Turning to the wider politics of Formula One, so outside of a team, the sport generally, how did you find that? Is it the Piranha Club that we mentioned earlier? Has it become more political under Liberty than it was under Bernie, or less? How do you read it?
Look, for me, it becomes political in a Piranha Club if the value of winning is high.
Yeah,
right?
Which it always is.
Yeah, it always has been. It has been under Bernie. I think the value of winning now, because the money's even bigger, the revenue's higher, the teams are worth more. The value of doing well in Formula One is even higher now. So has that increased the politics? I don't know. It was political under Bernie too, and Max as well. So those intra-team politics will always be there. I think the higher the value of winning, the more inter-team politics, not intra-team, inter-team politics will take place. And you just have to understand it and be, a half step ahead. Just understand why people are saying what they're saying, why they're doing what they're doing, and make sure that you're there with them, or a half step ahead.
It seems like it starts from the commercial aspect, like you say, the value of winning is high, so therefore everyone's chasing that pot, and you need to do everything you can to get as much of that pot as you possibly can, whether it be from on-track performance or doing things to aid your on-track performance. And that normally creeps into the technical and sporting aspects of Formula One, right? You're trying to manipulate as far as you can things to your advantage.
Absolutely. Rule making, for example, both on the sporting side and the technical side, mainly on the technical side, but occasionally on the sporting side.
Grass a team up, get them penalised or whatnot.
All that, or knowing that a team may have something on their car that is in the gray area of the regulations. How do you go about catching them out? You often write to the FIA and pretend you're going to do the same without any intention of doing the same. And then when the FIA write back saying, no, you cannot do this because it contravenes rule, blah, 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 then you write back and say, okay, great, I'm glad we're not going to do this, but please, can you look over here? So-and-so is doing just what we wanted to do. It's all those things. And it depends on how you go about doing that. But yeah, the teams do all those things, and just to try to keep the playing field level. But yeah, you have to do all that kind of stuff. And like I say, if the value of winning is high, then you've got to win in Formula One, you've got to do everything to a high standard and a few things better than anyone else.
What's it like to be on the other side of that, where you're the one everyone's going after? If we go back to the Racing Point time and 2020 and the pink Mercedes, as it was, uncharitably called, you were at the centre of a political storm over the technical relationship you had with Mercedes, and in the end it came down to brake ducts, right? That was the bit that you got caught on. How did that whole process work in terms of you being there, everyone coming after you, dealing with that, trying to fight your corner, etc.?
Yeah, so at that time, we always bought a Mercedes powertrain and gearbox. So the decision was made at Force India to not develop our own gearbox because we didn't have the resources required.
It went back to the Thorny days, didn't it? Because you had the McLaren relationship to start with. It was pioneering partnership.
Exactly. And I think that was the right decision. When you have a small team with not a lot of resource, a gearbox development will sap a lot of that resource. So,
well, Ligier did it with Williams in 1993.
Well,
went,
and Sauber and Ferrari forever.
Yeah.
They never developed a gearbox. So I get it. I totally get it. It was the right decision for a small team.
Yeah.
Don't develop your own gearbox, especially when gearbox design was pretty prescribed.
Yeah.
And gearbox design was also, it had to last a certain amount of races. It had to be robust. You had to choose your ratios at the beginning. You're not changing ratios every race. So suddenly the gearbox is, apart from its outside shape, is not a differentiator in performance. So now that the internals of the gearbox doesn't differentiate performance anymore, why do it?
It's called the suspension carrier, isn't it, effectively?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So apart from the fact that we always ran a high rake solution, and Mercedes
this is a low for people
front,
who don't know, low front ride height and high rear
ride height. So most teams ran, I think, all but Mercedes.
Yeah, Red Bull were pushing it quite aggressively, and lots of teams followed that.
And we developed our car with a high rake solution, but we're limited by the gearbox as to how high the rear could go.
Because Mercedes were pursuing the opposite philosophy.
Exactly.
And therefore,
so their suspension pickup points were such that you can only go so high on the rear, and that always limited us. And then when we had a bit of extra resource and cash, we decided to
This is when Lawrence Stroll was
when
involved,
Lawrence came in. So we decided to pursue a low rake solution for the first time, and everything we did with what you called that pink Mercedes was absolutely legal. And for us to shortcut the development process, it only made sense to look at the one team that has always run a low rake solution. Why wouldn't you? Everyone else does it. Everybody had spy photographers. Everyone's taking pictures of everyone else's car. It just so happens that the one and only car that ran a low rake solution was a Mercedes. So that's where our spy photographer spent all of his time. And there was a transition in regulation where prior to that year, you could share brake duct data with any other team. And that brake duct data then transitioned into not being able to share. So the brake duct data that we received from Mercedes and then developed around, we received in the year where it was legal to share. And we used it in the following year. And therein lied the controversy. And I still think that what we did was didn't contravene the technical regulations, because we received all that data in years before.
So what do you think tipped the scales against you in the end? Because there was, if I remember rightly, there was at one point it looked like McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull were kind of ready to go to war against Mercedes and yourselves, as like, this is outrageous. And then obviously there were hearings and whatnot, and then you lost your I think it was Austrian Grand Prix or Styrian Grand Prix points. I can't remember exactly.
We lost 15 points.
You lost certain points, didn't you?
We lost 15 points, and that was kind of a halfway house that the FIA took to keep everybody happy. And, we're not going to... So
there was a compromise meeting then, effectively,
Yeah, there was some compromise agreement that was neither here nor there. But it's what happened. It's, it's in the past. And even with those 15 points taken away, we should have finished third in the championship, but we had 2 engine failures in the last 2 races of that year.
Was it your most stressful time as a team principal, dealing with that bit in the early part of the season, where you've got other teams coming after you, you've got, a very vocal, powerful chief shareholder in Lawrence Stroll pushing the team in a certain direction. You've got Mercedes, a big technical partner that you've kind of got to navigate around in terms of what's happening. It can't have been easy to handle all of those. Yeah,
there are a lot of balls up in the air, and you had to juggle them all, that's for sure. But, if you have a good grasp as to what's happening, where you came from, why you did what you did, then, I don't want to say it's easy, but you have a good understanding, so you can field any questions and answer them.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland. Watch it now on Prime Video.
At Patron, we craft our tequila using high-quality natural ingredients without additives. No sweeteners, no extracts, no secrets. In fact, Patron's secret ingredient is that we have no secret ingredients. Just 100% additive-free tequila, made with 100% Weber Blue Agave, water, and thyme. Patron, 100% additive-free tequila. Visit patrontequila.com to learn more. The perfect way to enjoy Patron is responsibly. Copyright 2025, imported by Patron Spirits Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Tequila 40% ABV.
The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Well, let's talk about the different ways that politics play out in F1. Is it fair to say team principal has to be quite adept at using the media for political purposes? For example, say a team is suspected of breaching the cost cap in current F1. Would you deliberately turn the heat up on them any opportunity in the media?
Yeah, life in general. I shouldn't say life in general. In political life, politicians use the media. And Formula One, every team has a communications director, press officers. For sure, as a team principal, you use the media to your advantage. And you've got to be aware of it. You've got to have a strategy. You've got to execute that strategy. And yeah, there's a lot that goes into influencing, say, the decision makers in Formula One through the media, or even when you make decisions that are visible to the entire world, you can use the media to justify your decisions, for example, or you can use the media to help with the stance that you've taken in a controversial situation, to help with what you've chosen to stand for. You get the media behind you, and
well, that was one bit where
they can help make your point.
That was one aspect where Force India did play politics. I felt in the earlier days when the commercial rights in Formula One were less equitable, shall we say, and it was more of a struggle for teams in Force India's position to even compete, never mind win. I remember a threat being made towards the end of the 2014 season where Force India wasn't going to turn up to one or more of the final races because of this whole situation of teams struggling. And Bob Fernie, the late Bob Fernie, spending quite a lot of time briefing the media about this situation. We're not going to show up at this race. And do you remember that scenario? And there must have been a kind of plan hatched in terms of we're going to take this stance, and I think it was you and Lotus, Team Enstone, we called it earlier, were part of this kind of faction that were pushing back against what was happening.
And it's funny. So whenever, except for this year, that didn't happen this year. It happened in years past, but I was going to say, whenever Concorde is up for renewal, all those types of things come out. and definitely you use the media. This year, Concorde was signed and it was announced, and none of that played out in the media.
Well, they did all the fighting beforehand, didn't they, with Cadillac, General Motors coming in for 26.
But that wasn't really the all the aspects that of Concorde. That's just one little aspect. Well, not a little aspect, but
the most vocal one.
Yeah, it's the 11th team. But in the past, it wasn't about adding teams. It was about money distribution. The small teams don't get enough, and that always, all that kind of stuff was around Concorde, and everyone was trying to negotiate a bigger slice of the pie for themselves.
Yeah.
And there are teams that use the media to help in that regard, for example. This year, not so, which just shows that
everyone's happy.
Yeah, well, or Liberty have done a great job, and everyone's happy to sign up for another 5 years, which is absolutely fabulous. They have done a good job. The teams are happy. The valuations have gone up. The distribution's better. The total revenue's up. So it's all good. And the teams have signed Concorde in silence, whereas in the past, every time it was up for renewal, there's a huge upheaval. I mean, I remember the days of the engine manufacturers getting together and threatening a alternative series.
Yeah, breakaway Formula One championship.
Exactly. I mean, that happened twice around Concorde agreement signing.
FOTA as well. I think it was FOTA, wasn't it? The Formula One teams association.
And then there's also the all the car manufacturers got together. I remember having a meeting in Bahrain with Bernie sitting next to me and Burkhard Goschel of BMW leading the meeting. And that was all about money distribution for the new Concorde. All those things happened. And now I think that's dampened down a bit. And you can thank Liberty for having done a good job.
How do you think they've managed to achieve that? Is it simply just making the commercial rights a bit better distributed, a bit more equitable, or is it more than that?
No, there's three things I think that they've done. One, they've grown the revenue. Two, the distribution is more equitable. And three, they've instituted a cost cap.
Of course, yeah.
Right. So those are the three things that they've done that in the past were never there.
We talked about the 11th team element within that, and teams seem to change their politics based on the circumstances. So it was interesting to me that when discussion about Cadillac and GM coming into Formula One was newer, you suddenly had teams rallying around with each other, sort of taking the same position in terms of, Williams might say, we're still taking lots of money from our shareholders. We've got capital expenditures to make, and this is going to dilute our share. And you had similar arguments being made by Haas, for example. Do you think teams just kind of pick their sides based on individual circumstances or specific things happening in the moment? Or did you notice in your time that certain teams generally are aligned with each other based on other things like their technical partnerships, for example?
Yeah, so you definitely adjust with the situation that you're in. And if that situation changes, you adjust to a position that's most advantageous for you. If the cost cap, for example, changes and now you don't have the consideration of being held back from capital expenditure, then your position changes, for example. Or the 11th team does come in, but the anti-dilution payment is a little bit higher than it was at the beginning when they started negotiating, then your position changes, for example. So
you take it as a compromise, basically.
Yeah, as a circumstance that you find yourself in changes, your position changes as well.
Yeah, interesting. When you're in a press conference, again, going back to the media element of it, the presentational element of it, and you're taking a position that's at odds with another team principal, what's that like? Is it uncomfortable, or is it just a game to you guys?
Well, I mean, is it comfortable? Isn't it uncomfortable? You've got to have good reason as to why you're taking the position that you are, and then explain it. And if it just happens to be a position that is 180 degrees opposed to another team principal, it's probably because that team principal is doing what's best for his team and you're doing what's best for your team. You just have to be able to explain the logic as to why you've taken that position. And I think the world understands it. And you just have to, stick firm with your position, especially if you have a deep understanding of your team, your circumstance, and what you're trying to do is best for your team, then you stick with it.
Do you have to lie sometimes? Because there's this prevailing view that, people in Formula 1 will say anything if it suits them.
Yeah, so my dad was really, really hard on me from an early age that, you don't lie, you tell the truth. So I found myself in situations where I had to not say anything, so just remain silent. And that's a virtue, being able to just shut up in situations where if you say something,
you're in trouble.
Well, you can just be worse off. So say nothing.
Do you think there are team principals that will use bending of the truth, shall we say? Because in the wider sense, this idea of operating the grey areas and not necessarily following the rules exactly as intended or sometimes even written is part of the sport. So would that not apply also to how you play politics and how you deal with the media?
I think you can manipulate the truth, so you don't outright lie, but you can have different angles in that gray area, and depends on what angle you're coming from. I've seen that happen before.
Do you find, or did you find that in your political dealings, when you're in these technical working groups, in these meetings where decisions are made, I mean, obviously at one point the voting was much different. You only qualified if you were a certain level in the championship. So some teams were completely ostracized from the process of actually changing the rules. And it felt like that maybe made things more confrontational just in of itself. Whereas now things are a bit more broad, more people involved in the decision making. Like maybe there's a bit less political infighting between the teams.
I remember, and this is the kind of stuff that I used to despise, but I remember the FIA setting a regulation as to how big your fuel tank could be. And then suddenly, that was at a time where we're really, really concerned about the environment, fuel economy, hybrid powertrains came in, and the amount of fuel that we could carry on board was restricted.
Yeah.
And we all agreed to it. We went off and designed our chassis. We made compromises because we knew how much fuel we could carry. And lo and behold, the teams that had powertrains that weren't as efficient wanted to change that.
Ferrari.
Well, and I remember being really, really upset at that time when that change went through. We all had a vote for it, and I was flabbergasted that there were teams that voted for it that actually had an advantage if the fuel system wasn't enlarged or the fuel tank wasn't enlarged. So there are other things at play.
How do you explain that kind of self-harm?
Well, you explain it from a perspective that those teams that voted for it probably had such an advantage that it wasn't self-harm at that time, and they wanted a favor in the future.
Oh, I see, yeah. So it's bartering effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'll let you have this. You're going to be now ahead of some teams that you otherwise wouldn't be ahead, but you're not going to be ahead of me.
I'll get you later.
And in the future, you owe me one.
Yeah.
All those types of things happen.
Interesting. Take us into those meetings, because obviously they're closed doors, and information leaks out, stories come out, as just in the world of general politics they do. But what is it like when you're in these kind of high-level meetings? Big things are getting decided, whether it's to do with the technical regulations or commercial elements. Who sits with who gets on well, who doesn't get on well?
Well,
what patterns do you spot?
have to, before you go into the meeting, you take a stance on some of those decisions, and you have to understand who else has the same stance you do, and you tend to sit with them. And then you share, and you negotiate, you debate in those meetings, and ultimately you vote. So you tend to sit with those that are going to vote like you're voting, and there's strength in numbers. So If some of the bigger teams that wanted things that the little teams didn't, for example, it's easy to divide and conquer. So if you're together, then that division might not happen.
Does the personal ever come into it? Do you ever get people who just refuse to align with someone, not because it's in the interest of their team or not, but just because they really don't like
that person? Rare.
Yeah.
That's rare. It's more of a I'm doing what's right for my team.
Yeah, it's interesting because like Netflix, which we should talk about actually, because that has an effect, I think, on how people will perceive the way politics plays out in F1. Netflix would have you believe that Zach Brown and Christian Horner now are almost mortal enemies. You know, there's a famous clip of Horner calling Zach a prick on Netflix.
Was it the last this last series?
Yeah, going back through 24.
Yeah, so I haven't watched it, but yeah, I mean, Netflix is there to to get the biggest audience that they can, and sometimes what you see is I don't want to say fabricated, but there's a lot on the cutting room floor to tell the story. So I haven't watched that, so it's hard for me to comment.
No, I suppose it's another just aspect of managing the media, right? Because although it purports to be this kind of behind the scenes, fly on the wall type show rather than the sort of more classic presentational TV format of F1 coverage, nevertheless, once you're this far into it, the cameras are there, the mics are there, so it's a chance to kind of again present a certain way. It was more like that the first or second year, and then after you get the feedback of the final show, and then the next year you got the mic in front of you, you kind of change your behavior because there's that boom mic in front of you, and but in the first few years it was probably more raw or more genuine to what actually transpires behind the scenes. Did you enjoy the political aspect of being a team principal and having to manage all these things? I enjoyed trying to figure out where people were coming from, why they were saying what they were saying, and part of it was masking what you really wanted through words. And, I enjoyed that. I hear that this is what you're saying, but what you really mean is this. That's the bit I enjoyed. Was there a lot of back channeling in terms of, because the media has this one element of, right, we're going to present this view and it maybe aligns with some other teams or maybe not. But behind the scenes, you must be talking to each other in a kind of non-Netflix where there's no mic at all and actually having it out. Yeah. If you're in the pit lane, you see team principals walking into and out of each other's motorhomes quite a bit. And that's what that kind of stuff is about. Yeah, which then obviously creates its own story because everyone you can't hide. You try to guess. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I wonder what they're talking about. That feels like a good place to end this episode, Otmar. It does indeed. Ben and I will be back soon with more Team Principal talk, but in the meantime, if you'd like to drop us a line with any thoughts, comments, or questions, you can email podcasts@the-race.com. And if you're online and feeling kind, why not leave us a nice review on your podcast app of choice? That's it for now. Until next time, goodbye.